Hey everybody, it is late at night and I am Norman. A little bit ago, I announced that I'd be doing an AMA video, and you guys sent me enough questions to do this video. So tonight I'm going to answer all of your questions, so let us begin. So hopefully I pronounce everybody's names correctly. If not, I apologize. The first three questions come from Black and Tan. Question number 1. How did you get into watches and how old were you when you became a collector? Well, I've been into watches a bit for as long as I can remember. I was always collecting cheap gas station watches and whatnot. But it wasn't until I got a Seiko SKX 007 that I really dug into the hobby. Prior to that, I had owned a Fossil. I had also owned a Citizen that I bought with a bonus check from work, although that one died after I had the battery replaced and they didn't test the water resistance. Sad. I owned a couple of Citizen divers, but I really wasn't so much into watches. I was just a bit obsessed with nautical things at the time. But when I got the SKX 007, I rapidly fell down the rabbit hole. Question number 2. And that inspires the question, what's the minimum number of watches required to be a collector? That is an interesting question because there are people out there who have the one watch that they wear every day and they love watches, but they only have that one. I feel like in that case, you may have the mindset of a collector, in that you love watches and think about them often and stare at your wrist all the time. I don't know if there's actually a minimum. I had a friend who owned, I believe, about 3 watches, and he was going after a Zin. And at that time, he was a watch collector. He was kind of obsessed with Bauhaus watches. I remember we spent hours going over like the Nomos catalog and the Stova catalog and stuff. So his collection was about 3, I think. And question number 3, could a person have a few watches but not be a collector? For this one, I'm going to refer to the same exact friend and say absolutely. After he got his Zin, he was done. And he doesn't talk about watches. There are many times where I'm visiting him and he's not even wearing one. So I think, yeah, even though he owns 4 watches, he no longer is really into them at all. The next few questions are from Cliff Moores. Question number 1. Hola, Norman. I really like your retro style both in fashion and home decor. With that in mind, at what point do you seriously consider collecting vintage watches? Oh, I already have. If you look at my collection currently, you'll find that a vast majority of my watches are actually vintage now. Even such pieces as a vintage Movado Museum and my $20 Seiko tanks, which I believe are from the 1980s. That would qualify, right? I even have this little guy which I inherited. So next time I share my entire collection, you'll get to see all the vintage lovin'. And this next one really isn't a question, but it does need some clarification. I watched a video of yours where you let go of a Hamilton because it was manual wound. I personally find a deeper connection with my watches because of the winding. I actually didn't let go of it because it's a manual wind watch. I own quite a few watches that are manual winders, and I don't mind them too much. I am usually afraid of overwinding them on accident, so I'm very cautious when I'm winding my watches. The point I was trying to make is, between the CWC and the khaki field, it's so much easier to have the CWC as a shelf watch and just pick it up and go. Whereas the khaki field, I'm always having to wind it and keep it awake when I'm not really wearing it, but as a tool watch. My intent wasn't to talk down on manual winders if I came across that way. And then he also makes a point about vintage watches. Perhaps accepting vintage for what it is, once and all, may grow on you. Personally, I've been eyeballing a vintage Hamilton circa 1958 to 60, which would fit my love of both mid-mod and Ivy. I too have actually been eyeballing some vintage Hamiltons. I've seen a couple that are exactly like the khaki field in aesthetics, but they're 33 millimeters. Sweet. and their crystals look really awesome because they're vintage box crystals. The next couple questions come from Mike's Watches, and these are tough questions. Question number 1. Hello Norman, 2 questions. If you had to cut down your collection to only 4 of your existing watches, what would they be? Whoa. Rough. I have so many watches in my collection that are absolute favorites, I have no idea how I would break it down to just 4. So what I can do is I'll take my absolute favorite watch and 3 others that I wear most often. These are watches that I wear nearly every day, unless all the other favorites are on my wrist. So of course I'm keeping the pole router. This watch is just absolutely brilliant, and if there was any watch that was 100% my style, that would be the pole router. Watch number 2 is actually one of my watches of remembrance, just because I wear this constantly, especially now that it's summer because these look great with summer shirts. I am still absolutely amazed at how often I wear this watch. It's super dressy, it's super thin, it's quartz so it's easy to pick up and go, and for some reason I just absolutely love the Movado Museum. I bought one simply out of curiosity because it's such a crazy, extremely minimal watch. I had to see one in person. And then when I saw it, I can't explain it. I absolutely love it. And the last watch, if I had to narrow it down to 4, would be the absolute utilitarian CWC. This thing has enough water resistance to use it as a dive watch. This is the perfect vacation watch. It's small, kind of vintage size, vintage aesthetics, but it'll do anything. I can take it into water and just beat it up however I like. But I would cry for days if I had to get rid of the Olympos, the Wittnauer, all my other absolute favorite watches. And the second question, and also, if you could choose any single watch with no price limit to replace your entire collection, what would it be? Again, ouch. So I thought about this throughout the week, and I think I would actually go for the watch that was my grail watch for a while, and that would be a Reverso Duo Face. I would choose that because I love me some dress watches, I love me some tank watches, and being a duo face, I can swap from the light or dark dial, so I can kind of change it up depending on my outfit or my mood. The next 2 questions come from Boj Tonbul. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Question number 1, which no more existent brand would you like to see a revival? Absolutely Universal Genève, for sure. Again, the pole router is absolutely brilliant, and if you look on eBay and look at their other vintage watches, wow, they have some gorgeous pieces out there. Question number 2, in an early video you talked about a strap size and shape that you were struggling to find. Which one is it? I believe you were referring to where I was trying to hunt for an 18 to 14 tapered shell Cordovan strap. And I did end up finding one. My vintage Wittnauer is on a Veblenist strap that goes from 18 down to 14. This was a custom taper, so in the comments when you purchase their straps, you can request a taper or other customizations. I also found that there are some genuine lizard grain straps that have that same taper. So this one here is also the extreme taper, and it looks absolutely amazing on the Max Bill, which is another watch that I would definitely cry about if I had to get rid of it. The next 2 questions come from my buddy Pickles623. Hey Norm, what's the oldest watch you currently own? Now I don't know the exact date of production on this watch, but I'm pretty sure that this is the oldest watch that I own. Just given its aesthetics and its size, I'm guessing that this is from the 40s. In the second question, and what's your earliest watch that you still own? Hilariously, the earliest watch that I still own is my gigantic Invicta. I bought this well before I was a collector. But if we're considering watches that I actually consider part of my collection, strangely enough, the earliest watch that I own is actually the Nomos. I bought this a few years ago, and it's one of the only watches that's kind of survived the transformation of my collection. I bought this right as I was starting to get into dress watches, and so all the dive watches and larger watches that were in my collection at that time have long since gone, but this one and the Stova still remain. Thanks for watching.